Hey, everybody, welcome back to Retro Wrestling with Gene Jackson. I've been working on a couple of big projects and had to put this show on hiatus, but finally we are back with episode number 20 of Retro Wrestling, and I'm happy to finally be able to bring it back. This first episode is the first in our review series of Memphis Championship Wrestling from 2000 and 2001, and the intention here is going to be to, over time, eventually review the entire run of Memphis Championship Wrestling week by week. However, at times I'll be mixing in episodes where I'll be joined by a co-host, review, other retro wrestling shows, or perhaps I'll be joined by someone that I'm going to interview. But the rest of the time, I'll be here reviewing Memphis Championship Wrestling. So let's not waste any time, and let's go into talking a little bit now about how and why Memphis Championship Wrestling came to be. So, as 1999 was drawing to a close, Terry Golden's Kick-Ass Wrestling had been running for quite a while, airing on television on UPN 30 in Memphis. And they were more or less competing with Randy Hale's Power Pro Wrestling in the Memphis television market. And KEW stood out as being a Memphis equivalent of ECW at the time. Complete with a lot of the same style editing and music, just that hardcore style. It was very much a Memphis version of ECW, and much like ECW announcer Joey Styles and owner Paul Heyman, how they would take shots at their rivals, the WWF and WCW, on their television show. KEW announcer David Jett and owner Terry Golden would take shots at their Memphis rival, Power Pro Wrestling, which aired live on WMC TV5 on Saturday mornings in the old Memphis Wrestling time slot. And in the early days of KEW, Golden and Jett would spend a lot of time mocking Power Pro and, saying things like, well, we don't have any kings or superstars in KEW. But, however, that would eventually change. When Jerry Lawler decided to run for mayor of Memphis in 1999, TV5 unexpectedly informed Randy Hales that as long as Lawler was in the race for mayor, he could not appear on the Power Pro Wrestling TV program. Now, Lawler had already fallen out with Hales once previously about not being booked on Power Pro television on a week that he was available. But they smoothed all that out. Lawler returned, but this time around, he seemingly understood, that it was out of Randy's hands, and he bowed out quietly and seemingly voluntarily. However, during this time that he was away, that infamous promo with Doug Gilbert happened, that whole big shoot incident, if you will, and that would appear to permanently end Jerry Lawler's relationship with Randy Hales and Power Pro Wrestling, and along with it, it would end their WWF developmental deal. So, with Power Pro no longer an option, once the election for mayor of Memphis was over, Jerry Lawler struck a deal with Terry Golden to come to KEW, and along with him would come the WWF developmental deal. Now, despite the fact that this was in the era of, WWF's Attitude Era, a developmental promotion named Kick-Ass Wrestling was a bit much even for them at the time. So the promotion was going to be renamed. It would become Memphis Championship Wrestling, and a number of adjustments were going to be made to the show before MCW would debut on television on January 29th, 2000. And MCW would prove to be a mix of WWF developmental talent along with some of the previous members of the KEW roster, along with some local talent, along with WWF talent that they would be sending down to help, draw houses and to help create interest in the television show. So let's hear a little bit about what was in the Wrestling Observer newsletter. This was in the January 31st, 2000 issue, where Dave Meltzer talks a little bit about how MCW comes together here. So he wrote, Memphis Championship Wrestling will air on UPM Channel 30 at 11 a.m. Saturday mornings, which goes head-to-head with Randy Hale's Power Pro show on the traditional Channel 5 with Dave Brown and Corey Macklin. The whole story regarding this is weird, but apparently Lawler convinced McMahon to make the change. Lawler and Hales were originally together to start Power Pro. There is a belief that Lawler was in a sense behind Power Pro's formation, but all the paperwork was only in Hale's name because Lawler had a lawsuit outstanding over the collapse of the USWA with his former partners in Cleveland, and their case would have looked a lot better in court if Lawler got their money. Then their territory folded, and he already had restarted a new promotion in the same city on the same television station with the same announcers, Dave Brown and Corey Macklin. There was also heat based on Hales' testimony in the Cleveland investors' lawsuit against Lawler and Larry Burtman, which he says Larry Burtman in the Observer. I think the guy's name was Larry Burton. Then again, Larry Burton wasn't his real name, so perhaps his real name was Larry Burtman. I'm not sure, but nonetheless, moving on with what he had here, he put Lawler attempting to get that the lawsuit against Lawler and Larry Burton on Lawler attempting to get some ownership in the company after the lawsuit was settled, as well as Lawler threatening legal action against Power Pro due to some of the remarks made on television by Doug Gilbert that were totally unauthorized by Lawler. Now, my comment on that portion of it, I don't know any of that to be true as far as Lawler setting up Power Pro through Randy Hales and that it was actually his and it was only set up by Hales to avoid issues for Lawler with the USWA lawsuit. My understanding has always been from Randy and everyone involved that that Power Pro really was Randy Hale's baby, and he started it. You know, as he said on TV, it was a shoot. He was the founder, owner, and president, and that, you know, he chose to get Lawler involved because why wouldn't you if you're starting a promotion in Memphis? But I don't think Dave's on the money here, thinking that, you know, this whole thing was Lawler's baby and that Hales was just the name on the contracts. But again, I'm just going by what I've always been told. Now, he continued in the Observer. Steve Bradley, Rico Constantino, Nick Dinsmore, Flash, Robbie D, and Scotty Saber have all been pulled from Hales. Hales was given this past weekend to write them all out of the television shows. None of the talent that had been appearing in Memphis will be working for Lawler because of lawsuit threats by Hales. WWF has also this past week made a deal with Burt Prentice of NWA Worldwide, so the talent that was working Ohio Valley and Memphis can now work Ohio Valley and Nashville, all except Steve Bradley, who is headed to the WWF soon. That didn't exactly work out. Anyway, all except Bradley are expected to still work for Cornette in Louisville. WWF is going to send new developmental wrestlers to work out of Memphis for Lawler, who will have Jim Neidhart as his head trainer and will run a few nights per week in the territory with 2 hours of television taped every other Wednesday night at Sam's Town Casino in Tunica, Mississippi, with the first taping being on January 26th. He goes on to say, WWF will be sending about a half dozen people to Memphis, including Curtis Hughes, and it says in parentheses, if the WWF can find him, as he's apparently disappeared, along with Blue Meanie and Reckless Youth. Kurt Angle will be coming in for the first taping, and Bill Dundee is also scheduled to work as a regular with the group. Lance Russell, the legendary area television announcer for more than 4 decades, and who worked with Dave Brown on the Channel 5 show seemingly forever, was offered the job as television announcer. Russell, who is now in his early 70s, has agreed to do the first taping this week and then make a decision after that on how he feels about doing. Let me read that again. Russell has agreed to do the first taping this week and make a decision about it after seeing how he feels after doing the first 2 shows. What that means as far as Hales goes is that things are in jeopardy because he's going to have to stock his roster with guys who will literally work exceedingly cheap or for free. All right, so that's all from the Observer right now. So there you have Dave Meltzer's version of events. We'll check back with him later on after we discuss the first episode of television. Now, I do want to mention that prior to Jerry Lawler's defection from Power Pro, Superstar Bill Dundee had already made his way over to KEW prior to it becoming MCW. So they mentioned that Dundee was going to be here, but he had already appeared in KEW prior to this. So let's move on to episode number 1 of Memphis Championship Wrestling. The show opens up with Bill Dundee pacing around, talking to someone on his cell phone outside a door about whether or not they will be behind him if he makes the wrong decision. Bill ends the call and goes on through the door as we go to the opening, which features the classic Memphis wrestling type opening with the turning, grappling statue and that familiar theme music until the MCW logo comes busting through And then we go to some more modern rock music playing as we quickly go to the ring to announcers David Webb and David Jett as we are emanating from the Samstown Casino in nearby Tunica, Mississippi, which is already quite a different look from the venues we were used to seeing KEW TV being shot in previously. Webb ensures us that that it doesn't get any better than this, while David Jett makes a joke about being distracted by the two blondes in the front row, which helps establish right from the jump that Jett hasn't abandoned his KEW persona, it would seem. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out moving forward. But David Webb, of course, while he had been an announcer for KEW, some of you may recognize him and that name from the Global Wrestling Federation, including his inexplicable stint as an Elvis impersonating wrestling announcer. Yeah, not exactly a high spot for Global. But anyway, if you hadn't seen KEW, but you found that name familiar, that might be why you might be remembering from the GWF. Anyway, Jett immediately introduces guest commentator Lance Russell. And if you're kicking off a professional wrestling show in Memphis, folks, in any era, you can't go wrong having the legendary Lance Russell involved. So Lance comes out, he puts over Samstown, and he seems genuinely excited to be here. Lance then introduces the little Aussie, as he put it, superstar Bill Dundee. So Bill comes out. Immediately, he lets it be known that he's looking to become the commissioner of MCW. But Lance shuts that down. He starts putting over Bill and George Barnes coming off the boat from Australia back in the day. And Dundee quickly shuts him down and says, "That was then. I'm trying to talk about now." And he follows that up with our first bit of shade thrown at Power Pro when he says, "Everything on Union Avenue is in the past. Elvis is dead and Union Avenue is dead, Daddy." So if you thought that since they've landed Lance Russell, the King and the Superstar, along with the development deal, that this new promotion was going to take the high road and not acknowledge the other promotion in town, well, you'd be wrong. They let us know in the first few minutes that's not going to be the case. So Bill continues to make a case for being the commissioner of MCW. Lance isn't having any of it. He tells him he's not the one to talk to about it, and basically it's time to get to some action. So they're ready to get going here on the debut of MCW. But first, we cut to the parking lot where Bull Payne and Todd Morton are getting out of their car. They're getting their gear bags out, while David Jett lets us know on a voiceover that these guys are not employed by MCW, and that they are disgruntled former employees from KEW, as he put it, as they make their way into the building, which doesn't say much for the security at Samstown Casino, because they literally just strolled right in the back door, and there was no one there to stop them or even ask them, who they were, why they were there, or if they were booked. So we take our first commercial break, and when we return from that commercial, we see the man who is seemingly the current MCW commissioner by default, as it were, the former KEW commissioner, Van Harden. David Jett lets us know that Harden is scrambling to put together a card as all the WWF developmental talent are stranded because of a snowstorm. Wow, what terrible luck for their first TV taping, right? There was a big, huge snowstorm up in Baltimore where they were, and it delayed their SmackDown TV taping by a couple of days, and it caused all the talent they were planning to send down here for this TV taping, along with Jerry the King Lawler, to not be able to be here. So what a way to start. But referee Alki Holick tries to enter the building, but Harden informs him that he's been fired, and much like Dennis Stamp, he is not booked. So as he's being escorted out of the building, he runs into the two more KEW guys who also aren't booked, in Bull Payne and Todd Morton. And with that, about 12 minutes into this first show, we head to the ring for our very first match in MCW history. And that match is going to be Brickhouse Brown taking on Gangsta B.I.G. Now, Brickhouse Brown was a Memphis mainstay for many, many years. He's wrestled all over the world in the territory days. But I'm sure some of you, if you haven't watched this show yet, if you're listening to this review first, some of you are asking yourself, who the hell is Gangster B.I.G.? Well, he's a former guest of this very podcast. That's right. Del Rios, a.k.a. the Spellbinder, a.k.a. the Streak, a.k.a. Shock, a.k.a. Elijah of the Nation of Domination, a.k.a. Fantasio, a.k.a. Magnificent Maurice. That's right. He is now Gangsta B.I.G. Brickhouse looked in great shape here, despite, he'd been in the business at this point for 18 years, but he looked great. It was fun. It was fun to hear Lance Russell in his 70s say gangsta. Del Rios makes his way out, and Brick takes the mic from David Jett, and he tells Gangsta B.I.G. that he ought to slap slob out the promoter's mouth for what's about to happen to him. And then he told him to take his big swole ass back to the dressing room, and maybe he won't embarrass him here tonight. But it appears that Del Rios will, in fact, not be taking his swole ass back to the dressing room, and the match is on from there. Our referee is Aubrey Wayne, who people recognize from the USWA days. Both of these guys were as swole as I've ever seen either one of them. Jesus Christ, this episode should be sponsored by Diana Ball. Another fun line in this one, Lance says that Gangsta B.I.G. got knocked on his Gangsta B-U-T-T at one point when Brickhouse laid him out. Some of these review podcasts will give you almost a blow-by-blow account of every move and spot in every match. I honestly hate that. I can't sit and listen to that shit. And I feel it's just totally unnecessary. So in these reviews, I'll give you the finish. I'll give you any relevant spots that you need to know about. But if you want to see everything that happens, the show's here on the channel. Check it out. Please go check it out. Anyway, decent match here that ends when Brick tries to hit B.I.G. with a chain, but the Gangsta ducks. He manages to get the chain away from Brick, and he hits him with it, while the referee is getting hit by one of them. I didn't see who. Anyway, somebody bumped into the ref. Brick pulls out a chain. He swings it at B.I.G., who ducks, blocks it, gets the chain away from Brick. He hits Brick with the chain. Then he stuffs the chain in Brick's tights. As the referee counts 3, and the answer to the trivia question, who was the winner of the very first match in MCW history, is the former Spellbinder, Del Rios, now known as Gangsta B.I.G. And let me just say, while I really like Del's an awesome guy, one of my absolute favorites. I absolutely hate this name more than any other name he ever used. I'd rather he went back to calling himself Del Rios and dressing like one of the damn Village People like he did in 93 when he was managed by Burt Prentice than this silly-ass Gangsta B.I.G. nonsense. But not sure if this was his idea or the promotions or whatever, but it's what we're doing. So that's what we'll call him while he's here at MCW, at least for the time being. So before we go to our next break, we get a quick promo from The Rock. That's right, the old final boss himself. In his early days in the WWF, Rock reminds us to watch MCW. Well, thanks, Rock, but we're already watching it, if you smell what I'm cooking, pal. So we'll make sure to do that. As we return from the break, Lance pitches it to a disturbance in the back as backstage interviewer Kevin Christian runs into our disgruntled friends from KEW, the former employees as they were, as David Jett put it. And he asks them what's going on. There's a lot of commotion here. He's asking them what they're doing. They're hollering. I don't know. This isn't an interview. I don't really even know what they said. The main thing I noticed is Kevin Christian's a backstage interviewer, but no suit here for Kevin. You think he could have at least thrown on a yellow jacket or something, if you get what I mean. Sorry, I'll keep the bad jokes to a minimum. All right, we are ready for our second match here on the debut episode of MCW, and that is going to be the Littles, Itty and Bitty Little from KEW, who do the inbred deliverance gimmick as baby faces, no less, accompanied by the Littlest Little, Hollywood Little, taking on Swole and Hammer. This one doesn't even get going good before the old KEW theme song, Shoot to Thrill by AC/DC, starts playing as Bull Payne and Todd Morton hit the ring along with Alcoholic, and they lay waste to everybody with chairs, Todd Morton pile drives poor Hollywood. Bull Payne follows that up with a frog splash on the little guy. And then they spread out a KW banner that they hold over the fallen littles who've now been stacked up like cordwood, as Jim Ross used to say. And Morton gets on the mic and says that KW is not dead. In fact, KAW rules. So clearly these guys are going to be a big factor here in the new MCW. So after another break, we get a segment with Lance Russell talking about classic Memphis wrestling. He ends up pitching to the... We're going to talk about classic Memphis wrestling. There's no more classic match than Jerry the King Lawler taking on Terry Funk from the Mid-South Coliseum in 1981. What a great match that is. But we'll save the reviews of classic matches for other shows here on the channel. So just know that match is included here. If you go back and check out this show on the YouTube channel, it's there for your enjoyment. But from there, we take another break and we return to David Jett introducing superstar Bill Dundee, who has now come back down to the ring. He's got his suit coat off and he calls out Todd Morton to come down to the ring and fight him. He said, this has nothing to do with being commissioner. These guys are going to show up. They're wanting to disrupt things. He tells Morton if he wants to fight somebody, come out there and fight him. So Todd Morton runs in, followed by referee Bill Rush, and we realize this isn't just going to be a fight. It's our next match here on television. Superstar Bill Dundee versus the seemingly unemployed Todd Morton. And I guess since this was a impromptu challenge match, it must be a no DQ, as Dundee has kicked Morton in the balls multiple times, hasn't been disqualified. But this was a very fun match and fight right from the very get-go. As soon as Morton hit the ring, these guys are tagging each other. Looks like a real fight. And these guys are two old school guys. Todd Morton is a guy who is criminally underrated. He came along at a time where his size still limited his opportunities in the business. Had he came along a few years later than what he did, I think he could have had a very, very different career. I mean, he still had a great career that he can be proud of, but had he come along a little later when size, wasn't such a defining factor, I really think he could have had a whole different career. But nonetheless, these guys have a pretty fun little impromptu match here. Fight, wrestling match, whatever you want to call it. But this is Memphis, right? So, of course, Bull Payne ran in as Shoot to Thrill by AC/DC began playing once again as he ran in and attacked Dundee to cause this match to end in a disqualification. So there goes my no DQ theory from earlier. So I guess perhaps low blows are legal in MCW. I don't know. We'll see how this all plays out as we move along here. But, Morton and Payne, they start to double team Bill Dundee. They throw a pretty good beating on the little Aussie, as Lance calls him, until suddenly Gangsta B.I.G. makes the save with a small piece of a 2x4 that he must have been the only thing he could find on his way to the ring. But anyway, he hits the ring with this tiny 2x4. He starts to clean house and evens the odds. Building gets a hold of the mic and challenges the KW boys to a tag team match that night on Bill Street at the New Daisy Theater for the show they had coming up that night. These guys high five, and we clearly have a new tag team in play here at MCW. So we close the show with a pre-taped promo from Jerry the King Lawler, who is out in the snow because, again, he snowed in Baltimore along with the WWF guys after the taping at SmackDown. This was clearly spliced in after the fact. Lawler puts over MCW and what the fans can expect in the near future, and then cuts a promo on Bull Payne and Todd Morton, as clearly the plan was, I'm sure, to have been Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee taking on Bull Payne and Todd Morton at the New Daisy Theater that night after the show aired. But since, we had to plug in the Spellbinder due to Lawler being unavailable, plans changed as they do. But let's go back to the Wrestling Observer, this being the February 7th, 2000 edition. And Dave says, the debut of Jerry Lawler's Memphis Championship Wrestling on January 26th at Sam Town's River Palace Arena in Tunica, Mississippi for a TV taping that aired 3 days later. Head-to-head with Power Pro was a thrown-together show since none of the WWF talent such as Lawler, Brian Christopher, Stacy Carter, or Kurt Angle could appear since the SmackDown tapings had been moved back a day. They announced that MCW had taken over from Kick-Ass Wrestling, which had been the promotion on Channel 30, and are doing a feud based on that. David Jett and David Webb, who did the announcing for KUW, were doing the announcing. Lance Russell was in as a guest announcer for the first 2 shows until he makes up his mind whether he wants to commit to doing this full time. They ran their first house show on January 29th at the New Daisy Theater in Memphis. Power Pro had been running the New Daisy Theater, but they had abandoned it because they were unable to draw there. Those who did wrestle at the show were Bill Dundee, Gangster B.I.G., Harry Del Rios, a.k.a. the Spellbinder, Brickhouse Brown, and Kevin Christian. They are also doing an angle where referee Alki Holick, along with Bull Payne and Todd Morton, are claiming Kick-Ass Wrestling is still around, and they put a KUW banner up after doing a run-in. They had TV clips of The Rock putting the new promotion over. They had clips of a 1981 Lawler versus Terry Funk match, and of Lawler explaining why he missed the first taping due to the snowstorm in Baltimore, but he said he'd be there for the next taping on February the 9th, along with Jim Neidhart, the Blue Meanie, and Reckless Youth. Says the WWF talent was still in this week for Power Pro TV on the January 29th episode of Power Pro, as they were given a few weeks to write everyone out of the storylines. Jason Lee and Derek King challenged anyone in the back for a tag team title match, which ended up being answered by Wolfie D, who got a tag title match by himself and beat both guys to win the titles, which probably tells you all about PG-13's tenure in WCW. Tracy Smothers was given a big push as a heel, attacking both Rico Constantino and BJ Payne with chair shots. Smothers was ripping on Constantino, claiming that the American Gladiators TV show was fake. And after everything that happened last week, Power Pro Wrestling champion Ali fired Brandon Baxter, who was going heel. Jim Cornette was recruiting Smothers and made a comment that Smothers couldn't stay in ECW because he would have had to drink. And that's the end of the Memphis Championship Wrestling and Power Pro report from that edition of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. So there you have it, episode number 1 of Memphis Championship Wrestling here on Retro Wrestling with Gene Jackson presents MCW Revisited, show number 1. And I plan to do most of these by myself, and I admit I've never done this before. I know a few different guys that do it. I apologize if it didn't come off very well, but I'm going to work on this, as I really want to be able to do these where I don't have to try to work around other people's schedules and try to, I've got so many different podcasts that I have to try to schedule. It's just such a hassle trying to work around, someone else's schedule. And I feel like I can kind of, I can run through these shows and kind of give you some insight into what happened and why it happened and what other people were saying about it without having another voice here. But if you feel differently, please feel free to let me know. And if the consensus from listeners and viewers ends up being that I need to have a co-host, then perhaps we'll reconsider that in the future. But in the meantime, bear with me. Let me get my footing on this. My other reason for that as well is I want these to move quickly. There's so many 90-minute and 2-hour and 3-hour podcasts out there. I want to kind of keep this one short and sweet. We'll review the episode and, give you as much information as I can give you about it. And then we'll wrap it up because you got other podcasts to listen to and other things to do with your life, besides adding another 3-hour podcast extravaganza to the mix. So, like I say, bear with me while I get my footing here and figure out how to do this by myself. But I do want to hear people's feedback. And like I say, we're just going to take these one at a time. We're going to go through them. I can't promise you this is going to be a weekly show. As you know, I have the USWA show. I have the show with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. I've got the WrestleCopia Memphis 85 show with Ray Russell, Plus, me and him do a lot of video cast, and I do content for the Patreon. So I'm going to do these as frequently as possible. Sometimes it may turn out to be weekly. It may be bi-weekly. It may be monthly sometimes, but I'm going to do them as frequently as I possibly can. So I appreciate people listening. Hope you enjoyed this. I hope people enjoy these MCW shows. I know there were a handful of these out there, but I've managed to get my hands on nearly all of them, and I'm trying to get the rest of what I don't have and get them all uploaded here to the channel so you can watch them, check them out, and then you can go back and listen to these reviews. Like I said, I'll give you my recap of them, and I'll, from checking newsletters, from checking listening to shooting reviews, reading books, and from all these guys that I know personally, or know people who know them, I will give you as much direct feedback and stories as I can on MCW as well. So keep checking back. These will just hopefully keep getting better as we go along. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel here on YouTube, the Retro Wrestling Archive, or I say here on YouTube. You may be listening to this on any number of podcast platforms, wherever you're listening to it. I appreciate it. Please share, like, subscribe, and review. We appreciate it, but make sure you go to YouTube. If you're not listening to this on YouTube, go to YouTube to the @Retro Wrestling Archive and subscribe to the channel. We've got over 2,500 retro wrestling videos on the channel, and new stuff getting added absolutely all the time. So please subscribe, help us spread the word. Also, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Retro Wrestling Archive, where we have bonus material of these podcasts. We have footage and content that we can't necessarily put up on YouTube available there. All kinds of fun stuff. All my notes from this show will be posted over on the YouTube channel. Over on the Patreon there at the patreon.com/Retro Wrestling Archive. All kinds of fun stuff there. So check it out. We're also going to have a new exclusive Patreon podcast coming there soon. The Retro Wrestling Review CWA podcast. So be on the lookout for that as well. So also, for all things related to my Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast, check out uswapodcast.com. And for all things related to the Dangerous Conversation Show with Dangerous Doug Gilbert and Tommy Wildfire Rich, check out DougGilbertPodcast.com. And if you have any questions, comments, or requests, feel free to email me anytime at genejackson95@gmail.com. And last but not least, make sure you check out our friends Brian Trammell, stspod.club. Check out WrestleCopia.com for all the great content from our friend Ray Russell, many of which I'm involved with. And also my good friends over on P3 Radio. So I guess that does it for this week for the first episode of MCW Revisited. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another episode of Retro Wrestling with Gene Jackson.